Well, looks like the same old crowd and the same old teacher. But we make a pretty good combination, I think. Several have mentioned enjoying this study. The book has its difficulties. It's dealing with a subject that we're not that used to discussing because we take for granted that people accept the Bible as the Word of God and they accept God. But we're dealing with some people here that don't do that, and that number is increasing. And they've gotten more organized, and they've become very evangelistic in spreading their message. And you can see it all over the social media and in other areas as well. We're going to begin with a word of prayer. Brother Logan is going to lead us in prayer. Let's all pray together.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, we come to you now just to thank you, Lord, for letting us all be here this Sunday morning. Lord, we pray that we can take this lesson that we go over today and be able to apply it to our lives. Please forgive us for our sins and look into all our hearts. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. One thing I want to get to before we get into today's lesson, we discussed quite a bit on page 66, that question at the top. How would you rate the New Testament witnesses? And it's a possibility we misunderstood that question. I think it's based on the previous question. I don't think he's asking us to rank the four Gospels as to which ones you like the best. That's kind of the way some of us took it. But the previous question, I believe, sets the stage for that one. And so I don't think he's asking us to rank them. Probably not good wording in the question, but the previous question, what criteria does the criminal court expect of its witnesses? Based on those things, how do the four Gospels rate? And those are honesty, ability, opportunity, accuracy, faithfulness of memory, number of witnesses. And so I believe it's asking on the basis of those principles, how does the New Testament rate? What's that? Yeah, the New Testament matches up with all of those, doesn't it? And so that may be what he was asking, because I really couldn't, I had a hard time believing he was asking us to rank them against each other, but that's kind of the way we took it. And Kathy pointed that out to me, and I will share that with you as another way of looking at this question. And so let's think of it in terms of that previous question and how they rank, and they measure up in all regards to that. Each one of them does. Okay, but any other comments about that? Okay, we are still on the lesson, what is man? I didn't mark exactly which one we got to. I'm going to guess at it. We may catch one or two we already discussed. But on page 73, those questions appear. And see, I had some extra copies up there, but it looks like they're all gone. So hopefully everybody's got a copy of the lesson that we can look at. And we were talking about the secular view of man. And I'm going to say we got to about number 4. Why is it impossible for secularists to affirm that man is the most highly developed animal on earth? Why can they not do that?
Because they have conscience.
Well, the secularists, of course, they don't believe anything in the Bible. But the point is they have nothing to measure with, do they? How they know that man is the highest and that he won't be replaced, as they claim some others have been replaced. They claim that dinosaurs were the highest at one point, but we saw that they didn't survive, did they? And so the lower animals and all of those other creatures that are made, they've got to do some presupposing, and they're presupposing that there is a measuring stick. What is it? They haven't told us. They haven't told us what that measuring stick is. And it's not controlled by one of the animals within the food chain because they would be biased. So we're not in charge of that. If there's no God, of course, God is the one that sets it. What right does man have to decide that on his own. Number 5, what moral conclusions follow from the secular assertion that man is just an animal?
Some pretty grave conclusions. I mean, most of us don't have any problem with two lions, fighting to see which one's king of the forest. But if this is true, then you and I could fight to the death, and there'd be no problem with that as well.
Yeah, the survival of the fittest, victory goes to the fittest, the one that's the strongest. And that can change. Remember, as kids, we played that game, King on the Hill. That can change, can't it? Depends on who can stay on the hill and throw the other ones off. And so they're saying that life is kind of like that. So in one particular point in history, this person may be the strongest, the fittest, in control, but he has a way of getting old and being replaced by the younger. No more what?
No moral compass at all.
Yeah, no moral compass for the rest of the people too, if he's the strongest.
Until the next strongest comes.
Until the next strongest comes, and then the standard will change. And we see how that works. So he's not governed by moral law. To whom is he morally responsible? Well, and who said so? That's kind of been decided, but we're not told who had the authority to tell us that. Are they assuming they're the ones that are the strongest and they get to tell us? Number 6, what causes thoughts in any animal according to secular belief? And that would be humans too. They believe humans are animals. What causes thoughts?
Collision of atoms.
Yeah, just a movement of random chemicals, atoms, and so forth in the brain. Man's thoughts are random. They're a random collision of atoms. There's no organization to it. And so that just really reduces man, and it's hard not to think that people who are saying those things have a motive. I believe they've got a motive. It's hard to believe that they're arriving at those conclusions with no motive, because the end result is we don't have a standard of morality. We're not governed by it. We're governed by the fittest. And of course, that's just totally contrary. Also, it leaves us with a very dismal attitude toward the future, a very negative attitude toward the future. Christians have something to look forward to, and we have a reason for joy and happiness. But where is their joy and happiness? In total self-indulgence and obsession with self-indulgence, which is the outcome of no moral law. You're free to engage in all the self-indulgence you want to, that you can get away with, even if that involves trampling on other people, if you're strong enough to do it.
Dick,
Yes.
if man is just an animal, of course they use that language because they want to reduce him, but sometimes they want to elevate him too, which shows he's more than just an animal. But if he's just an animal, he can only have animalistic thoughts. Of course, it's pretty obvious that man is much more than an animal when it comes to this. For example, I didn't mean to go off on that point, but it's obvious man is the only animal that foresees his death. Other animals don't do that. We may raise a cow, for example, because we want to slaughter it and have its beef later on. And the cow contentedly chews, the grass and drinks water and so, has no idea it's going to die in the future. I don't think any other animals have that idea, which shows man is much greater. But if he's just an animal, he can have nothing more than animalistic thoughts. And what's the value of animalistic thoughts for rational discussion and rational thought? Unless you begin to add an element of rationalism, then he's not just an animal. But if he's just an animal, why should, if I'm just descendant of an animal, why should I even trust my own thinking, and why should anybody else?
That's kind of what Darwin
Yes.
saw that, but he went ahead and,
And there's no answer to that.
yeah, Darwin expressed that very thing. How do I know I can trust my thoughts? So if I believe I'm result of the lowest kind of animal, I came through all that process, how do I know my thoughts can be trusted? Well, he raised a good question. He didn't answer it.
Yeah, that's right. It's not answerable. And I even think some atheists say, if that's true, we can't have any rational thought, an argument, etc. And in fact, all we are is babbling to one another, which means absolutely nothing.
That's true. And there's no indication that animals look forward to a future life in heaven, anything like that.
They only look forward to their death.
Saying there's a motive, what is that, what do you think the motive is?
Well, some of the early evolutionists, like Aldous Huxley and others, admitted that belief in a moral standard got in the way of their sexual freedom, their things they wanted to do in an immoral way. And laws of morality, of course, were against that. And he admitted it interfered with that. And I believe that's often the case. He was honest enough to admit that. There haven't been a lot that would, but that is the result. If there is no moral law, anything goes.
And if anything goes, and you just, part of what you just said about people being self-indulged, when I look on social media at a lot of these things and the way a lot of these people are acting, going out, destroying works of art or tearing down flags and putting up the flag of a terrorist organization, that seems pretty self-indulgent to me. So is the end result not just that they simply don't care about society as a whole?
Well, many of them do, and I mentioned a book that I've been reading, I misplaced it, which talks about how atheists borrow their morality from the Bible. I don't know many atheists that are doing some of the very worst things they could possibly do as a result of their atheism, except maybe people like Hitler and Stalin and Lenin, some of those people. But most people that don't believe in God, many of them are pretty moral. They can be good neighbors. But they do it in spite of atheism, not because of it. And that's what we've got to see. And they've borrowed their morality from somewhere. Some of it comes from the Bible. And so they realize that moral standard is better for conducting a society than just living as though anything goes.
Dick,
Yes.
Mike refers to three bad results, that these are the best things that atheism can give us. And the first is nihilism. Now, nihilism has two meanings. One is just absolutely existence is meaningless and not worth anything. The other one is that social conditions have gotten so bad that it's better to destroy the whole system and start over again than to continue with the way it is. And so that second one, so the communists, the revolutionaries, and the anarchists, they'll often do things even to destroy their own society because it is so bad, worth nothing, that anything they could have later would be better.
Yeah.
So that's their motivation, destroy society right now.
Yeah, and who's going to be in control of all of that and deciding what the future's going to be? We're at the mercy of people that are trying to promote that, aren't we? And of course, that's not a good thing. Alman did some work on this lady, Christina, what was her last name?
That's her last name.
Okay, yeah, she's mentioned on page 68 and 69. She's an atheist, and he quotes from her in that middle column there on page 68. One atheist, Greta Christina, expressed the secularist view of man as follows, and he explains it there. Humans are the dominant life form on the planet right now. But even that doesn't make us special. And he did some research about her name, and he may want to explain that to us. He printed some of that up. I don't know if he made copies for everybody or not, but
Not everybody, but if anybody wants one, I can give them a copy.
she changed her name, but she didn't change that part of it, did she?
Well, no, what she did was, well, first, I didn't know that she had changed her name legally when she was 20. My first impression was, just for her to have that last name, Christina, the thing about the name is, it's the feminine form of the word Christian. And in both the masculine form, Christian, and the feminine form, you have the name Christ. So her name, on all of her atheistic publications and pronouncements, often even without her first name, is Christina, which means honoring Christ, you know. But I later learned, she said when she was 20, she changed her name, and she hadn't changed it in the last 40 years since then. But when she's about 20, for some reason, she took her family name and took it away. I don't know what it even was and why she did that. But she took her middle name, which would ordinarily hardly ever be mentioned or known, Christina, and made it her last name. But it means following Christ or belonging to Christ. And in 40 years, she hasn't changed that. So on her atheistic pronouncements against Christ, she has a name that honors Christ.
Yeah,
Now that's a paradox of paradoxes.
real irony there, isn't it? And funny, she changed the name, but she didn't change that one. She changed one of her other names.
That's her middle name, and she pulled it up to be her last name.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some irony in a lot of these things that could be pointed out. And if you need a copy of that, he can make you a copy of that. Let's see, we got, which one did I get to? Which one? 7. On what grounds can a secular view of man argue that men ought to act to control carbon emissions?
It's a consciousness responsible for doing that.
Now, what standard of morality imposes that on us, but not other things that involve personal morality?
Well, and the author in the book makes the point that what gives someone the right to even say that.
Yeah,
So, you know, if you can do whatever you want, then if I want to, I can, and you shouldn't be able to tell me not to.
well, that's true. And so it's not logical. If consciousness makes him morally responsible, then why just carbon emissions? Why just that one issue? What about all the other issues of morality? How can that one be imposed but the others not? But they're making that more important than anything else. So,
Those two things don't line up. How can we know that man is the highest of all the creation, but then in the next breath they're saying, man is different. He has consciousness and he has a conscience. So which is it?
yeah. Yeah, it's more contradictions there and inconsistencies.
If they say that man is just an animal, he's not able to understand the future and predict the future. And scientists can predict some things. They can predict eclipses. Now, this question about whether we are destroying the planet or not, I mean, isn't agreed upon with everybody. But if it is, it shows man is more than an animal, just an animal. So they're going to have to give up their evolutionary, biological thing about man if they're going to say he has the ability rationally to understand even the future, you know, how that this carbon is building up and it's bad for us and so and so. But even if that's true, in the evolutionary situation, there's no reason to impose it upon anybody else, even if we are killing ourselves.
Yeah, what right do they have to impose that? It's a good question to ask.
But of course, she wants a totalitarian government to impose it.
Yeah. Of course, yeah, a lot of them, that's why some of them want a one world government that can impose on all of us.
And one part
Yeah. Number 8, what is man's purpose according to secularism?
To exist in life and then die.
Okay, he really has no purpose if there's no future life, does he? And that's why I say atheism is a very dismal thing, nothing to look forward to. If you decide that life has no meaning, and it doesn't matter where we come from or why we're here or where we're going, if we don't need to know any of that, what kind of future we look for? They believe when you die, you're just like a dog, dead all over like Rover. So there's no reason. If there's no justice, no day of justice coming, and no day of reward, no day of punishment, you might as well indulge in everything you can while you're here and get everything you can and do everything you can, even if it involves stepping on other people, if you're able to get away with it. That's the logical outcome.
Man has a soul, though, which they're not recognizing.
Yeah, we learned that last week, that they don't believe in the dual nature of man, that they just believe he is a physical being.
One organism, total organism, all joined together.
Yeah.
But no place for anything like a soul or a spirit.
Yeah, and they have to. It's interesting to me, if evolution is true, how come the majority of people have evolved to the point that they believe there's a future life and that we have a soul? Where did they get that if evolution is true? Why do most people believe that? Well, it had to be evolution that caused it, according to them. Yes.
If we're just animals and what we were taught was badly and not making sense, why should we believe a word of what they're saying?
True. We're no more obligated to believe what they say than they say we're obligated to believe the Bible.
Yeah, when she gets into her social reform here, she's gone out of the realm of the evolutionary viewpoint, and the question is, how is man able to understand the rate at which he's building up the carbon in the atmosphere, et cetera, and that's going to destroy, kill all of us eventually? I mean, how is man capable of doing that? Where did it come from? It didn't come from that biological process, as they indicate when they keep spouting just an animal, just an animal. Here they're in fact admitting he's more than an animal, and so where did that come from?
Comes from atheism, from wanting to promote unbelief. They feel the need to come up with some kind of an explanation,
It came from God.
and so that's where all that comes from, their explanation, instead of from God. Number 9, what view of life does secularism create and logically lead?
They all eat, live, grow old, die. That's it.
Okay, well, same as animals, right? Same as all the other animals. Live, grow old, and die. And so there's no purpose or meaning in life. According to that, look at page 69 in that third column there. Third column, about the second or third paragraph down. So what is man? The secularist doctrine of man is that he is just an animal, perhaps a more highly developed animal than others, but no one can know that for certain. Man is destined to pass through his life cycle, and then he will cease to exist. And should one's moment of suffering and pain become a burden to one, there is no reason to prolong one's life cycle. And that's where they're going to lay the groundwork for euthanasia and things of that kind.
And right above there, he refers to these 3 bad things they can only lead to: nihilism, pessimism, and meaninglessness.
Yeah, pessimism is really there. It's just a total dismal outlook on life. And I see that in some of the websites that are dominated by atheists. It's depressing. They don't have anything to look forward to, except convincing everybody that there's not a God.
Have you ever seen an atheist or one that doesn't believe in God smile?
I don't know. Well, I guess they could. They get some momentary things
Yeah,
in life that they're indulging in that bring them pleasure, but when it comes time to die, there's not many that have a glorious outlook about the future.
Yes, animals do not know they're going through a life cycle and will die. But we know that. They say we know that. But if we're just an animal, we would not know that. And they're making us more than an animal, and when they do so, they are giving up their atheism.
Yeah, they want to deny that, they want to say man's an animal, but then they want to say he's better than the animals. Were they saying that about dinosaurs at one point? Question that. Okay, on the Christian view of man, number 10, according to Genesis 1, what is man's position in God's universe?
Created in the likeness of
A ruling position.
What's that?
overruled stuff.
Okay. He's the crowning glory of God's creation, isn't he? And so, I know there's some arguments about that, whether woman is or man is. She was created after man. Saving the best till last, some people say that.
She's a helpmate.
Yeah, help meet. So, thinking of that question, he's the crowning glory of man's creation, made in the image and likeness of God, given dominion over the rest of the creation, we're told. And you can read a more thorough answer to that question on page 70 in that middle column, which comes directly out of the Psalms. What is man? The question is raised. What is man that thou art mindful of him? And Psalm 8 is a good place to go and look for an answer to that question. Number 11, why is he given that position?
Take care of God's creation.
Okay. It has to be God's love that gave it to him. What else could it be? It has to be the love of God. And that man is made in the image of God. That's not said about any of the animals. And so man is different than the animals, contrary to what the unbelievers say. Number 12, how is man allowed to use God's created planet, plants, and animals?
He made him ruler over everything on the earth, so he can do what he wants to.
Okay, he was told to subdue the earth, wasn't he? And that it is at man's disposal. Men are able to capture and use animals that are much bigger than they that could kill them. But in some countries, elephants are used to do work that a human couldn't do. But the elephant is subject to the human. Now, an elephant can kill a human. Some have that have gotten wild, but they can be trained, they can be controlled. And we see that as man uses the animals.
In 2:15, God demanded of Adam that he would dress the garden and keep it. I think direct it, to dress it means to improve it. Whereas keep it means to protect it from decline.
Okay, and then he was to take care of it.
And he understood those words also the very first time God spoke those to him. And I think they are the first, aren't they the first words in Genesis that God speaks to Adam?
Maybe, I'd have to go back and check, but that sounds logical, yeah.
I think that's true, 2:15.
Yeah, first words he tells him. He gives man a responsibility. He gives him some work to do. And so it's a good thing. Number 13, what view of man is expressed by King David in Psalm 8? We've referred to that.
Made him a little lower than angels.
A little lower than the angels, but he's higher than animals, isn't he?
Higher than he does on earth.
Yeah. And that same thing was said about Jesus. He was lower than the angels. That is, in his human form. He wasn't originally lower than the angels, but in human form, he became like a man. He was all that God could want in a man and all that man could want in a God.
Mike talks about man, having a spirit or soul, and he refers to how often the New Testament, makes that statement. Whereas he says the Old Testament doesn't say much about it, and so he gave us a little bit, and one was a psalm that said, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that, but it could. But there's one case from David himself which shows that David believed in existence after death. Remember when his baby died?
Yeah.
And then he said this. He said, well, first of all, I'm not praying and begging God anymore because the child's dead and he won't come to me. he said, but I can go to him.
Yeah,
Now, did he mean just go to the grave?
No.
Did he mean the baby was just dead and would rot in the grave and be nothing, and he's going to the grave? Isn't he saying that the baby has existence, in the spirit world, and when I die, I can go to be with him?
yeah, I believe he
Isn't
is.
that a necessary, conclusion from that? Necessary.
Yeah. So there are glimpses of that view in the Old Testament, although it's not taught us thoroughly. In the New Testament, and you can get bogged down in discussing with people who don't believe that man has an immortal soul. And we don't need to allow them to pin us down to just the word soul. A lot of times the idea of man living on after death is not given a name like soul or spirit. It's just described like Paul does. He said he could be absent from the body and present with the Lord. What was it that was going to be absent from the body and present with the Lord? He doesn't use a word to describe it, but there's something about him that could be absent from the body and present with the Lord. John?
And I don't know how much revelation Job had. I mean, it's thought to be among the earliest of the writings. But Job said, I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God.
Yeah.
I don't know how much he knew, but he knew that.
Yeah.
Also, a number of the historians in the Old Testament say this: when a person dies, he's gathered to his people. Now, as though the people are still people.
Yeah. We're still regarded as people, yeah.
And of course, Jesus, we would have known that if Jesus hadn't said it. When God said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he's telling us that God is still their God and they still exist. And so then, since they exist, the resurrection is easy.
Yeah. And he says that we'll sit down in the kingdom of heaven with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's a use of the kingdom there to include more than the church, because Abraham and Isaac and Jacob weren't in the church, but they're in that eternal kingdom. And so, yeah, there are a lot of passages like that. The one that John mentioned in Job, I know that my Redeemer, you ought to write a song about that. That's a good song. Okay, the next one, number 13. What view of man is expressed by, number 14. What is the earliest biblical evidence for when man could use and understand language? I think Alman answered that a while ago. In the garden, he was to contrasting that view, man begins in a garden. What's the secularist view of how man began?
In a pond.
Yeah, and for a long period of time he lived in a cave, and he only could communicate with grunts. He could just grunt and do the. That's how they depict him, as he's still half animal and half human. Yeah, all he can do is grunt. But there are people today still living in caves. That doesn't prove anything. So they kind of get beside themselves there. What about the next one? What is the earliest biblical evidence for man could cultivate the earth? And that again is mentioned there, as Alman mentioned, chapter 2, verse 15, to keep and dress the garden. But then he's also given work to do after he's cast out of the garden, isn't he? And that's where the thorns and the thistles come in. And man having to work by the sweat of his face comes in. What about exercising free will? Okay. Okay, at the temptation by Satan in the garden, exercise free will. And then what about feelings and feel and express emotion?
I heard your voice and I was afraid.
Okay, I was afraid. There's an emotion, fear.
Dick,
Yes.
the free will, the serpent obviously believed in free will, or he wouldn't have tried to change, their mind about this matter and their practice.
Yeah, he
And
did.
the end result shows that he was right, that they had free will, because then they turned against God and disobeyed him.
Yeah. But then Jesus didn't. So Jesus had free will too when he was tempted by Satan. They chose to follow Satan. Jesus chose not to. It was a free choice. And okay, and then the next one, what about to show guilt and shame? Kind of already talked about that. They clothed themselves because they were ashamed.
I was afraid.
Yeah, and they were afraid.
Express loneliness.
What's that?
Loneliness.
Loneliness, okay. Yeah. Okay, number 15, how does the Bible answer these questions? Who am I? Okay, we're a creature in God's image who is responsible for his behavior and responsible to serve God. He wants to spend eternity with God. What about the second question? Why am I here?
To take care of his creation and all in it.
And to fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man, whole duty of man, the King James says. And where am I going? Heaven or hell? Yeah.
You have a choice.
Yeah, the Bible answers those simply, but it's another indication of God using the simple things to confound the worldly wise. They're always wanting something complicated, some kind of a complicated thing. Almond? Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking again about how the atheists, as I've said so often here, because they say it so often, and it's a fundamental thing. We got to hold them to it, that man is just an animal. But then they show, and if you listen to one, I've never heard a gorilla get up and give a lecture on theism or atheism, or give a lecture on anything.
Uh-huh.
But we get up and we can talk and understand one another regardless of what they say about, what our thinking is. And how that man can predict the future, like she says, about the destruction of the earth. I mean, animals can't do that. And when you start picking out those things they're admitting, well, just listen to them. Their vocabularies and everything. I mean, brilliant reasoners, etc. Although they often reason fallaciously. But they get awfully close to what Genesis is saying about what man is.
Yeah, they kind of pride themselves in the use of logic. They say that Christians are not logical, but
And if an atheist child dies, how does he feel?
yeah.
And he may cry and have that sorrow in his heart for a long time. The only animal that I've been told has that kind of feeling is the wolf. Because scientists say wolves marry for life. I mean, males and females join together for life.
Made for life, yeah.
And a wolf is apt to lie at the body of his, of his spouse or whatever she or he is, for quite a bit of time. But I don't think that's very common. But the wolf may howl, but it doesn't go into a long speech like an Indian, and so about someone's death. But an atheist can go to a funeral and have that sorrow in his heart for a long time, but that again, by his own actions, shows he's more than an animal.
Yeah, and a lot of them have the emotion of anger. I had a written discussion with an atheist several years ago when I first started preaching. And he came to be an atheist because his son was murdered at the University of Southern Mississippi. And he decided if God would let something like that happen, there can't be a God. Well, that kind of thing's been happening since the beginning of time. It didn't just start then. But man has free will. And he has the right to make a wrong choice. And somebody made a wrong choice in murdering his son. But I don't know, he may have been sorrowful too, but he was also angry. He was angry because he thought there can't be a God if he would allow something like that to happen. Well, he hadn't considered the whole picture, the whole big picture.
We're not in paradise anymore.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet. Okay, was that the first bell? Okay, let's look at page 80, starting with questions. We won't get very far in this lesson. First one, on what two concepts does the secular worldview of abortion, eugenics, and euthanasia depend?
Man's more than an animal.
Okay, that's the first one.
Moral absolutes.
All right, they're depending on these two things, that man is nothing more than an animal, and that there are no moral absolutes. If you grant them those two things, then anything goes. And they really don't have a right to say how anybody ought to behave. As soon as they start saying there's some rules, we're going to say, who's the rule maker? And where did he get that right?
I just heard in the news about a group, I guess they're atheists, but they certainly aren't believers in the Bible. They're an organized group, you know, even nationally, I guess. They're going up to Washington now with a deliberate purpose of helping aged people die.
Helping aged people die, yeah.
Isn't that murder?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a dismal outlook, no question.
Of course, they say, but ones who want to die, ones who, have such pain and have, just, well, like having Lou Gehrig's disease, when you can get to the point where you can't even breathe anymore.
John?
I know this is just, exaggerating, being silly, but here's the stance that they take. There is no truth. Someone asked, is that true?
Yeah.
Truth is unknowable. Well, how do you know?
Yeah.
There are no absolutes. You mean absolutely none? It just goes on and on.
Yeah, every time you can turn it right around on them. Yeah, it's kind of ironic.
I heard the story one time in a college class where a professor said, only a fool would never change his mind. And a student said, Professor, are you sure about that?
Number 2, how does the secular mindset view the baby in the womb?
As an egg, fertilized egg, or a fetus?
Okay, the word fetus means baby, but it's a Latin word that is often used to dehumanize today. If you can call the baby something besides a baby that sounds very impersonal, like a fetus, then that gets you away from the emotional aspect of it. But fetus means baby, and we can understand that. But most people don't realize that, but they're trying to dehumanize it by using terms that we don't usually use to describe a baby.
And as you mentioned, terms that aren't used anymore, abortion is becoming one of the terms that's used less and less. That abortion now is being called reproductive rights.
Or terminating a pregnancy. Yeah.
Terminating a pregnancy, but it's not called an abortion because
It has a bad connotation.
Abortion may not be good, but who can argue about reproductive rights? And they're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's just something we need to be careful of, and don't let those buzzwords or buzz phrases become part of our own vocabulary.
Well, that's right. And the term Planned Parenthood, that's a misnomer if there ever was one. It's a plan to avoid parenthood, not Planned Parenthood, it's a plan to avoid it.
My brother and me, I read where it said that they wanted to check a pregnancy. When a woman's pregnant, she check the pregnancy, be sure the child's okay. And if it's not okay, she chooses to do away with it.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, that kind of puts man in the position of God to make those kind of decisions. John, did you?
And just to show, how relevant this is, Oprah Winfrey just spoke at the Democratic National Convention, and the summary of what she said was, without abortion, there is no American dream.
Wow.
Without abortion, there is no American dream.
That's what she said. It's on YouTube.
Was she dreaming when she said that?
She was
Sounds like a nightmare. So, well, there's the last bell. Mark your places there. We got number 3. Well, we're on number 2. We'll go ahead and check number 2 and talk about that some more.